that part of you that's resisting that kindness is usually anger. And the paradox of that is anger is the part of you that loves you the most, is the part of you that wants to protect you. And it's the part of you that says,
Welcome to the show, Crystal Field.
thank you.
Happy to have you. So, what got you into hypnotherapy?
I have always been really interested in psychology my whole life. And I ended up going through this process myself because I had gone to all sorts of different types of traditional therapies for my own anxiety and depression and trauma and stuff like that. And it just never really fixed it. It was just talking about the issue over and over and over again. So when I found hypnotherapy, it really helped me actually put those things to rest so I could actually heal. And it really changed just pretty much everything in my life. And I became really passionate about it because I realized that this was a really effective technique, and I really wanted to start sharing this with other people.
You talked about how traditional talk therapy didn't work for you, and as someone who did talk therapy themselves, I can completely relate to it. Because would you fair to say it just makes you relive the same traumas over and over again, unlike hypnotherapy, where you get to the core root of the issue?
Exactly. Yeah, talking about it over and over again, rumination is what it's called, can actually exasperate it and keep you stuck in that moment. And so talking about it, getting to know where it comes from is always good, but then the next step after that is to do something about it. And that's where hypnotherapy comes in, is to actually heal it at the roots instead of just talking about it.
So, how would someone actually heal the roots with hypnotherapy? Because this is something I've always had difficulties with. I'll bring something up, I notice it, and it's like, what do I do next? Like, genuinely, people have always said to me, Cayde, you're very good at self awareness. It's like, yeah, but what do I do beyond that?
Right. That's very common. And so the way that we're able to heal the roots is by changing the belief systems. It all comes down to belief systems that were pretty much imprinted into your subconscious mind, usually a really long time ago. And even if you're consciously aware that you want to change and you consciously know that you're good enough, that you're worthy, etc., if you have a subconscious belief that is really, really hard to make that change because our subconscious mind is designed to not change, to keep us safe. It's like the concept of when you're a kid, if you touch a hot stove, it's permanently ingrained into your brain. You don't touch hot stoves because it hurts. And so it's meant to keep us safe, but when it holds on to belief systems that are harmful to us, like I'm not good enough, there's something wrong with me, etc., those can be really difficult to change. And so hypnotherapy is able to kind of relax the conscious mind. So it's not trying to protect you, open up the subconscious mind, find where those belief systems are, and then start changing them. And so they don't keep replaying that old program over and over again.
Use yourself as an example. What have been some of the old beliefs that you've changed through hypnotherapy? And do any of them kind of align, or are they common with other people's limiting beliefs as well? So, I'll you make up an example. You think you're not worthy. Like loads of people would initially think that. Would you say that was one of your limiting beliefs, or do you have something a bit different but on the same train of thought?
Yeah, definitely. So I grew up, like many people with a rough childhood. And so I definitely had beliefs of I'm not good enough. I had the belief of there's something wrong with me. And so I would mask my true self. I would always be really hyper aware of other people's reactions and emotions, to the expense of myself, which left me feeling resentful and lonely. And so a lot of the beliefs that I changed were from when I was very young, those times when I would be myself and I would be rejected. And so I was able to change those belief systems from I'm not good enough to I am good enough. And there isn't anything wrong with me. And I am always lovable just as I am. And so those really helped me be able to bring out my authentic self, which means now I don't have resentment and I'm not lonely. because I was able to actually find people who love me for who I am, not just the mask that I'm putting on. And that was a huge game changer for me.
You mentioned about the mask that you put on. Would you describe it more as like a persona you showed to the world? Because the Japanese have got this saying where there's three types of masks. There's one you show to the public, there's one which you only share to close friends and family, and there's one that no one sees, or even those closest to you. No, would you say that perfectly reflected you, like the three mask thing? So you had the one which you showed everyone, you had the one where you only showed close friends and family, but the one that you worked on was the one that only yourself saw.
Right. And I really worked on aligning those three to be the same because who I am by myself is of course, when I'm the most comfortable, right? And so if I could take that true me, and be that in every situation, regardless, then I would be able to attract people into my life who love me for who I am, not for what I provide. And so I think that, of course, in certain situations, you have to have self-awareness and you can't just like emotion dump and be rude or in every situation, right? You've got your professional areas, you've got your personal areas. But if you can bring out your authentic self in every situation, it really helps you be able to not have that anxiety of always having to manage how you're behaving. And that's something that it takes a lot more energy and than people realize to do that. It's like, have you ever been to like an event and then when you go home, you're just exhausted just from talking to people and trying to make sure that you're behaving a certain way and trying to make sure that you speak a certain way, thinking about how I'm holding my hands and how I'm, positioning my body. And it takes so much energy to do all that rather than just relaxing into it and just being able to be yourself and to be able to say the things that come naturally to you instead of trying to fine tune and people please, if that makes sense.
I wouldn't say at events, but I definitely get to work all the time where I've become very self-conscious and made sure not to fall down this trap where even I've fallen into it where you're tweaking what you say, what you think, and what you do. I'm thinking, best not, because that's, like you said, you're just people pleasing at the end of the day. And I've always been in the mindset of, okay, I don't care how you perceive me. If you don't like me for who I am, I know it's going to sound arrogant, but do one. Because I just can't be asked personally. I don't know whether you can relate.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And there's always the concept of compassion and kindness too, right? We don't walk around with like the kind of ego-based authenticity where you're just telling everyone, if you can't accept my harshness, then you're not for me. Well, we used to be kind and compassionate, which is something that I also work with my clients on a lot, is learning how to be kind to themselves and compassionate to themselves, because the way we treat ourselves on the inside is reflected on how we treat people on the outside. And so when you can be your authentic self and be kind and compassionate, you're going to find that a lot of people actually really like you and they're going to feel comfortable around you. They're going to be able to pick up on that energy of you being relaxed, which helps them feel relaxed. And overall, it just becomes a much more pleasant experience.
How would someone be kind to themselves? Because admittedly, this is something I'm not at all good at, and I do have the self-destructive behavior of, nah, I'll just chastise myself and that fun as I come with it. But then at the same time, I think it depends on someone's backgrounds. Like you said, you didn't have a best childhood. I certainly didn't, and I've been vocal on that on my own social media. It's easier said than done as well. So how can people take the steps to be more kind to themselves whilst not using it as justification just to be horrible to others, like you said, with being rude and all that?
So one of the first things that I do is I reconnect them with their inner child, because we all have an inner child within us. And that's a really important concept to understand. And I always like to tell my clients, those negative thoughts, that harsh, critical voice in your head, would you say that to a child? Would you behave that way towards a child? Would you have those unrealistic expectations towards a child? And 9 times out of 10, it's no, of course not. I would never tell a child they're stupid, or I would never tell them that they're not good enough, or I can't believe you made this mistake. What's wrong with you? Of course you wouldn't say that to a child. And so I teach them to treat themselves as if they're holding little one inside. And I want them to stop in their thought processes and ask themselves, does little one deserve this? Does my inner child deserve this? Would I say this to someone that I deeply love? And that sometimes it can be a process because depending on people's backgrounds and how they grew up, sometimes they have really deep belief systems where they don't even like their inner child. And in those cases, I flip it into, well, would you say this to someone externally that you love? Would you say this to like your partner or to your niece or your nephew or your child? Those kinds of things. And so it kind of reframes, okay, maybe I'm being a lot more harsh and critical on myself than I realized. And then to start training your brain to pick up on it and then halt those thoughts midway and apologize to yourself. I'm so sorry. You're not stupid. There's nothing wrong with you. It's okay to make mistakes. And those kind of processes will start to retrain your subconscious mind so it's not attacking you all the time. Because the judgments that we have towards ourselves are always inevitably reflected in the judgments that we have towards other people.
And where do the judgments towards others come from?
Generally, from our perception of ourselves, based off of the judgments that were placed upon us when we were children. Common ones that I deal with is the judgment of you have to earn rest in order to be able to relax, right? That you have to work so hard, just are like ready, and your body is screaming at you that you need rest, but you have to earn rest. And that's a really hard one in our society to kind of rewire. And so that's one that I work with quite a bit on helping people understand that you need a good balance between work and rest, and you don't have to earn rest. It is your right to have rest. And so when they have that judgment inside themselves of to work, I have to work, I have to work in order to earn rest. And then they see someone else taking a break, someone who's honoring that part of them that needs rest, they're automatically going to think, oh, they're just so lazy, or there's something wrong with them because you have that belief that you have to earn rest, right? And so it projects onto how we judge other people, especially if they're doing something that we are unable to do for ourselves.
You're making me reflect quite a bit on myself during this conversation. I think, I don't know whether you'll agree with this, but would you say when you start out or when you first get exposed to like these ideas of being kind to yourself, love your inner child, which is one which I personally hate to the core for a number of reasons, but would you say you've got like this resentment and this just anger towards the idea? Is that something I personally find quite a bit? It's be kind, be loving, and all this. I'm like, absolutely not. Did you find that? Because I think that's something I struggle with. Or is that kind of a common theme where you introduce someone to this new idea of be on the lighter side and they just reject it?
Yeah, that can happen, especially if you had a really rough childhood in the terms of you had a parent or someone in your life that was incredibly critical or incredibly abusive, because that part of you that's resisting that kindness is usually anger. And the paradox of that is anger is the part of you that loves you the most, is the part of you that wants to protect you. And it's the part, if we allow ourselves to put our guard down and to start being kind and compassionate, we're at risk for being hurt again. And so it's that part of you that wants to protect you from that pain. But the thing is it doesn't realize that that's not necessarily what's going to happen, that you're in a different circumstance, you're in a different environment, right? And so it can be really resistant in letting the guard down, which is why I also do a lot of anger work with my clients so they can have a healthy relationship with that part of themselves that wants to protect them, but is keeping them from being able to grow and to change. And so we work with that part because we don't want to get rid of that part. That part is important. That's what keeps us safe in this world. But we also want to kind of have a conversation with it and be like, look, I see you. I understand you're trying to keep me safe, but I'm the driver of my life now. I don't need you to protect me anymore. I can pick and choose when I need to be protected. And so we build a really healthy relationship with that part of you that's being resistant to that change.
How have you seen the resistance in changing some of your clients? Because for me, it's not a little bit of shadow work, and I think I need to go back to basics on how to do that. But I know one of them is You introduce an idea and your natural actions go no, the complete opposite. So take a weight loss, for example. You might say to someone, hey, to lose weight, you gotta go in a calorie deficit. And they think, now go in the calorie surplus. Just use that for example. So what has been some of the resistance and changes you've seen?
Well, the biggest resistance usually comes from a form of anger, and fear. Fear is another big one where they're really scared because they don't know what it's going to be like to to do the opposite of what they've been used to for so long. And so there have been times where I'll try to do like the inner child work and there'll be a lot of resistance. And so I'll flip into anger work. And we have to work on that part first. We have to get that anger out. We've got to resolve those things. And then we can move into inner child work. And then they can soften up to those ideas. And even with like weight loss, it goes back to that self love, that part of you that says, I love myself so much that I'm not going to allow myself to continue to hurt myself anymore. I'm not going to eat that food that's not healthy for me. I'm not going to smoke that cigarette that's not good for me. And it goes back to, would you hand a cigarette to a child? Would you, want your inner child to eat all of this junk food that's going to make them feel like that? And so it kind of goes back to that perspective shift. But there are times when there's a lot of resistance because there's that fear, and that fear usually comes from that part of themselves that wants to protect them from what they can't really see on the other side. And so that's where I come in to help them into that process and to give them that safe space to be able to explore these areas without that fear.
I want to kind of touch upon this a little. Well, you've got the 9 out of 10 people who wouldn't put their inner child through the stuff like give them the cigarettes, give them the drugs, give them the other. What is the mindset between the 1 out of 10 people who would? I feel like we're going to be missing a massive
Yeah, so those
opportunity.
ones are very rare. Yeah,
Go on.
those ones are really rare, for sure. Yeah, those ones usually are because they still have an immense amount of anger. And so the resentment towards others, the resentment towards life in general, the life is so unfair. Why should I care? Kind of mentality. That one can be really hard to deal with. And that one usually takes a lot more. But again, it really comes down to the anger. It comes down to being able to have a good relationship with your anger and also being able to express a lot of suppressed anger, because that's where a lot of that comes from, is suppressed anger. That bitterness towards the world comes from that deep set part of you that says, this is not fair. This is not fair. None of this is fair. And they're right. There's a lot of things in this life that are not fair. And so I teach them how to be able to channel that into a healthy way that's constructive instead of destructive.
Reminded me of something that Jordan Peterson said, although saying that has been ages since I've heard this, where he said that he mentioned about people who are bitter and resentful, and they've got like this self-defeating philosophy in a weird way where they're so bitter and resentful, they are constantly shooting themselves in the foot. Like, it's been so long, but I forget what he said, but you know what I mean. It's so destructive where it's, what do you do in that?
Well, that's difficult because in order for people to change, they have to want to change. I cannot force anybody down a path that they don't want to go, especially when it comes to mental and emotional health. And I love Jordan Peterson, by the way. I've read all of his books. He's a very intelligent psychologist, and I very much appreciate his wisdom. And he is right. Those people really do shoot themselves in the foot because they become their own self-fulfilling prophecies. Their belief systems that they have end up reflecting their reality. And so they're constantly getting that feedback that's just feeding those belief systems even more. And I mean, honestly, it can go one of two ways. Either they hit rock bottom and they come to the realization of this isn't working and something has to change, in which case they have to crack open that shell and start considering, other perspectives, or they drive themselves into complete darkness, in which case it's not something that I like, but there are people that just will never come around and they won't be able to crack that shell open and they'll end up living a life of misery. And I have compassion for them. I see them and my heart feels for them, but I can't save them because that's not a thing that's possible. People can only save themselves. And so that's something that I've also had to learn in this process, is when to recognize the people that are ready for change and when to recognize when people just want a savior and they're not ready to do the work to save themselves. And those people, unfortunately, are impossible to work with.
Have you tried working with those people?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I have. And I've had to have some tough love conversations with them where I had to confront them and say, do you really want to change? Are you going to do the work? Because I can't do it for you. I can't make you do it. I'm not going to walk alongside you 24 hours a day, making sure that you're doing what you need to do to make these changes. I'm not going to do that. That's impossible. So I really have to put them in front of the mirror and say, do you really want this? Yes or no? If you do, then I'm here for you. And if you don't, if you're not willing to actually do this, then I can't help you.
Well, there's always, you mentioned about the first two, well, the two options. There's also the third option with those people in that situation. They end up hurting others in a way that's, well, they can't come back. And I think, as sad as it's going to sound, I can relate to those people in some regards, because I think it's just a familiar in that situation, because I've always wondered what stops someone from like changing their life and changing environment. I think one of them is comparison. They don't have the comparison of what's better, so they don't have the motivation or the willpower to go and do better, or they might just not know. I mean, when I was younger, I not mean to pull on your heartstrings here, but I lost my mum at a young age. But straight away, I had some loving guardians who in the show were there for me, so I had that comparison of, yeah, I've gone through this, but I've got people who actually love me. Whilst it's taken me years, that's the main point, is I've got the comparison, but there's an alternate version of me where I didn't have that, so I never had the comparison, and I can see how people get stuck in that cycle.
Yeah, that happens quite a bit. That's where the concept of ancestral trauma comes from, is from a person going through an experience, and because they never broke out of that, they never were able to break out of it, they pass it on to their kids. And so their kids learn that kind of way of coping, and then they pass it on to their kids and pass it on to their kids. And that is a very real thing in our world. But there are those chain breakers that are able to, because of the way that they're built, because of the way that their brain is, because of whatever circumstances, they're able to look around and say, this isn't working. I don't want to do this anymore. And you're right, there has to be that moment of being able to see contrast, that there is another way. And that usually comes from either, again, hitting rock bottom, where you realize that this isn't working. This is not good. I see other people being able to be successful and have loving relationships and families, and it's possible. Why can't I get there? And so that kind of contrast helps them understand that there is a possible way towards that, but obviously what they're doing is not getting them to that. And so they do need to be able to have that kind of perspective. And so in those cases, again, it comes down to really wanting that change and being able to have that shift in perspective in order to make those things possible.
I've also heard it where the way you are is so painful that you can't actually stay that way anymore. I had that actually at 22. That was my case, is where, no, actually it was 23. I remember I was sat in a train station, and then I just thought, I can't keep living this way. And then I went and got myself a life coach, and then this is how this podcast started. A bit of long story short. But then if I never had that, then who's to say where I'd be today? I think you're right. There's a lot of different factors. For someone, it might be, you hear all the stories like, oh, my girlfriend broke up with me, then I went and did this, or my siblings or family member had something tragic happen to them, so I went and did this. There's that common thing with brothers where you take two brothers, one's and they both come from an alcoholic dad. One becomes alcoholic because their dad was an alcoholic, and one doesn't have a job for alcohol because their dad's an alcoholic. There's also this weird, like, you could take, you know what I mean? It's like you could take two, they haven't got the exact same scenario because each of them are going to have slightly different lives. I think that's where a lot of people forget, but they have a similar situation. You can have two varying different outcomes. So I think there's a lot of factors. And I think you're right as well, in the sense that there's different builds and different mindsets and different characters.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah, different. It's that concept of, the boiling water. You put an egg in the boiling water or you put a potato in the boiling water. It just depends on what you're made of and what happens. You can be in the same situation and you can be in the same environment, but have totally different results depending on who you are. And even like you were saying, the two brothers, right, where one decides to go in one direction and the other one goes in the other direction, it's because they're different people. They have different personalities, they have different brains, they have they're basically like different spirits in sense. And so it really does depend on what you're made of. And there are some people that just naturally are able to understand that what's going on around them is not right and it does need to change. And then there's some people that just never quite get to that point. They just don't have the connections in order to be able to make those changes.
I also think it might be people say about like people's reactions is up to them. I wonder how much of it is subconscious. I know brain make a decision. Your brain's made 10 seconds before actually make the decision. So using the two brothers again, one of them's decided to become an alcoholic 10 seconds before they actually go down that path in their brain, and vice versa. So I wonder how much of it's also a bit of a subconscious reaction, because I've asked myself a few times where, okay, I'm not perfect, and I've never done everything perfect. I'm glad to admit that, but I wonder how many of my decisions have been made because on the subconscious level and not a conscious. Those decisions where you just think you want this or that, and go, that's the decision I go with, as opposed to where you sit there and you constantly think, should know, what if this happens, what if that happens, or maybe if I tried that. That's where I'm going with this.
Yeah, that definitely comes from your subconscious because you're going to make decisions based on what you know. And that's the database that is your subconscious mind. So your subconscious mind is like a giant biocomputer, right? With infinite storage. And everything that has ever happened to you, every experience, every emotion, everything from the day you were born all the way up until you are now is stored inside of your subconscious mind. And that's the purpose of it, is to try to give you that database to be able to compare and have those moments where you have to make those decisions. And so people will always make decisions based on what they know. And so it's always going back into the subconscious mind and doing like a fact check, right, of what it already knows, which is why we can get caught in these cycles of making poor decisions, is because the subconscious mind has already got it imprinted in there that this is what we've done before, this is what we're going to continue doing because this is what makes us feel good, et cetera, et cetera. And so it can be a harmful cycle, but it also can be really helpful in terms of if you have experiences that teach you good belief systems and you have experiences that teach you how to see things differently and how to be able to make different decisions. So the subconscious mind is just a tool, right? It can be used one way or the other depending on the kind of belief systems that end up being placed inside of it.
The most unique belief system that you've seen while we're on that train of thought?
The most unique? That's a good question. I mean, they're really, really similar pretty much across the board. Like we are very connected in our deep set beliefs. But when it comes to spiritual beliefs, those are always to be very unique. And I've had people who have pretty much no spiritual beliefs, but they kind of believe that there's something out there. And then I've had people who are deeply religious and everything in between too. And what really ends up being fascinating is the fact that in a lot of my sessions, when I'm doing work with my clients to try to get them back to a place where they felt safe and secure, some of them end up slipping into what we call life between lives before they were born, and some of them even slip into past lives. And those are always very interesting sessions because it's taught me a lot about the spiritual aspect of humanity. And even if the person themselves don't believe in past lives, it happens. There's the deep spirituality that is very unique, of course, depending on the person, but that's been one of the most fascinating journeys for me to kind of just be able to witness the way through this process.
as you were saying about past lives, I was just thinking of my own ones because I did a like this timeline therapy thing with a different therapist who I've had on the show. And when I went back into mine, there was two that came to mind. One was a warrior who ran away from something really scary, and another one was like this World War I soldier who just trips up in the muddy field surrounded by woods, and kind of reminded me of that because I wonder how much past lives influence our core beliefs in this life. It sounds kind of like spiritual woo-woo kind of stuff, but it's worth considering though because you don't know what's a knock-on effect from a past life, and it does make working on your subconscious beliefs that more difficult, I'd say, because you might think, well, where's this belief come from? I've got no evidence in this life. Yeah, but it might have happened 3 lives ago. I don't know.
Right. Yeah. And that does make sense. It does make it a little more complicated, which is why I never have just one session with my clients. It's always multiple sessions, is because the subconscious mind is complicated. And I have had clients where, I mean, they will have, like deep Christian beliefs. They don't believe in past lives, but they'll end up carrying a trauma from a past life into this life. And the process that I use to help them through that is the same, regardless of where the trauma comes from. But it does kind of pose that question of like, how much of our imprinted personalities and, preferences are from this life and how much of them are from a past life. And so, I mean, I've got my own personal belief systems and theories and stuff, but honestly, it's going to forever be one of those, like I'm going to forever be a student as I'm working with my clients, and I'm always going to be learning new things about it because in some cases, sometimes there's nothing from a past life that carries over. In some cases, there might be a lot of things from past lives that carry over, and it really just depends on the person and their journey because everyone is a very unique journey and they have very unique purposes in this life. And so being able to discover that also gives them a sense of peace, though, which I always really appreciate.
There's just someone who doesn't want to follow their purpose and want to go and do something else. Because let's be honest, we didn't all choose to be born in this world, so why should we have a purpose bestowed upon us when we didn't have a choice whether we were here or not? Sounds arrogant, but it's still something I always kind of contemplate with myself.
Yeah, I've never encountered any spirit that didn't choose to be born. Never. I think that from the human perspective, we can feel like we didn't choose to be born because of the trauma that we endured in this life and how unfair it feels. But at the same time, that part of you that has a higher perspective, that part of you that can take the huge step back and see the whole universal perspective, knows that there is a purpose that you're here. And even if you don't want to accept it right now, that's okay. Your spirit still kind of chose to be here for a reason. And in my experience, the people who resist that concept tend to be the most unhappy and have a lot of anxiety and depression in their life. People who tend to be able to embrace that have a lot more peace and clarity, and they move through life with a lot more ease. I actually just had a client last week where she has literally gone through her whole life with the identity of what her parents put upon her. I mean, to the point where even when they were conceiving her, they did it at a certain time because they wanted to have a Virgo baby. And like they were very adamant on who she was going to be before she was even born. And so when I was working with her, she ended up slipping into that life between lives, back when right before she was born, when she was still in spirit form. And she was saying to herself, they've already got a plan for me. They already have what I'm going to be planned out for me. Why do I even want to do this? And so I took her back just a little bit further and I had her ask Source. I mean, people can call it God, they can call it Buddha, they can call it whatever they want to call it, but the Source. And I had her ask Source, what is my purpose? Why am I choosing to be born? And then she was able to get those answers. And those answers were, you're meant to bring kindness into this world. And the only way that you can bring true kindness is to be able to experience the opposite, because you can't comprehend one unless you experience the other. Just like we can't comprehend light without dark. And so it was like a light bulb moment for her where she was like, oh, now I get it. Now I know why I wanted to do this. okay, now I'm ready. And then she went through the process of being born, and all of those preconceived anxieties of not knowing who she was, and like this life was forced upon her, disappeared and dissolved away because she realized that the trauma that she endured is what prepared her to be one of the most kind people in this world, and that she will be able to transmute that pain into kindness for others and become a light. And so that purpose that she was able to discover also helped her realize that she did choose to be born into this life. And she did choose to sign up for these lessons, and that these lessons were going to help her be able to reach the depths of kindness that she wanted to bring into this world. And so the purpose doesn't have to be like a career, it doesn't have to be a relationship, it doesn't have to be anything physical. It could be simply love, kindness, compassion, understanding, those kinds of things into this world. And in order to be able to understand that part of the spectrum, really to experience the other side first. You can't understand what love truly is unless you've been without it,
I
right?
know it's a controversial figure, but you instantly reminded me of something that Andrew Tate said. Said, "You want my life, you have to have all the crap that comes with it." It's like what your client went through. It's like you want kindness, or you've got to experience what it's like to be what well have people unkind be unkind to you. It's the exact same mentality. You don't appreciate being rich unless you're poor. You don't appreciate having a perfect relationship unless you had a bunch of crap ones. You don't appreciate moving to a nice country unless you're being in a bad one. It's the exact same mentality. That how do you appreciate what you have without going through the complete opposite of what you didn't have?
Exactly. Yeah. Contrast is the only way that we are able to comprehend things. It's the way that our human brains work. And so, and we see it in nature too, right? Everything has polarity, and that's how we're able to understand the opposites. And so it's true. I mean, that's why we make mistakes. That's why humans can really only learn from making mistakes, honestly, because we have to know the contrast of one side in order to understand the other side.
It sounds like a literal and physical definition of yin and yang. You know what I mean? It's like one's the opposite, one's the
Yep.
yeah. Except you live that instead of it just being, oh, this would be a nice interview. Do your thing. Oh, I'm going with this, but you know what I mean. It's like here's one thing. Now here's the other thing. Have fun.
Yeah. Yeah. And it can seem really unfair if you can't see the perspective of it, right? So if you don't learn from the lessons and you keep repeating the same mistakes over and over again, that's going to keep continuing the pain, because the pain is trying to tell you, okay, you need to do something different now, right? And so when people don't listen to that, they keep continuing that pain. I actually really love the concept of the yin and yang. I'm a huge fan of Taoism myself, and I think that there are some concepts in there that are universal and are extremely helpful to understand. But you've got the little light inside of the dark. And it's important to remember that even when you are in the depths of hell, that there's always a light. And even when you are in the upper ecstasies of life, that there's always going to be a shadow that you need to be aware of. And if you can keep in mind that this is how the world works and that this is how life works, you can ride the waves without getting consumed by them.
Crystal Fields, everyone. Where can people find you if they want to learn more about your book you as a hypnotherapist?
Yeah, and so you can find me on Facebook, Harmonious Hypnosis. I've got my website, harmonioushypnosis.com, or you can check me out on Instagram, Heal with Crystal.
If you enjoyed learning all about hypnotherapy with Crystal Field, and if you want to learn more about the topic in question, then I have Sarah Maud, who's a hypnotherapist herself, right here. But if instead you want to learn about something else, then I have Iana Arakri, who is a reality shifting coach, right here.